right. So, we thought, show of hands, how many of you snack or eat in front of the TV? See, right? So when they said, do you want to talk during lunch? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't make any difference. So enjoy yourselves, keep eating. And I've got a great show for you. So Canada's import replacement opportunity is being discussed in boardrooms all across the country for a whole bunch of reasons, because of supply chain, because of the interest Canadians are expressing in local, both before and even more so after the pandemic. So I've been talking to a lot of super smart people. I have a degree in English literature and I'm trained as a chef. So I've been doing a lot of research and learning a lot about cellular food and cellular ag, as it's often called. And I was really inspired by what I had learned. There's this frontier open to these food science-driven companies that I want all of you to know about. So I've assembled a really great panel to come up, answer some questions, demystify what is possible. But just before I introduce them, I'm going to show you just a couple of slides just to set the tone. So this slide is one from our CFIN Who We Are deck, and you'll see that there are some circles that are sort of, not colorful. Those compromise the things that CFIN members who aren't interested in cellular agriculture are interested in. But if you look at the colorful ones, you'll see that cellular food can touch on so many of the priorities that we saw in all of the meeting rooms today and at the tables, and that we see turning up in the literature that we read all the time. There's a benefit to every single one of these priorities. So in Canada, there was an amazing report. So my source for a lot of the information here is a report that was put out by Ontario Genomics last November. The source is there. It's called Cellular Agriculture, Canada's $12.5 billion opportunity. And they did some fantastic research where they figured out exactly, what could be our future if all the right things were in place. And as you can see, there's not only a big economic opportunity, but a really substantial sustainability opportunity right on our threshold. We've already seen a huge amount of investment go into cellular ag. A little earlier today, I talked with two people that are in my network who are also in the investment space, and we talked about the need to educate investors more so that they understand not only this space, but also the runway for getting companies up and running. And we see big companies like Boston Consulting coming out with interesting data. I personally am very surprised by this number that they think that price parity can be achieved by 2025, and I'm going to ask my panelists about that. I think there may be a few provisos, but we'll see. So what exactly is cellular food? Cellular food is food that is 100% bioidentical to food that you would get through a traditional agricultural or food processing or refining system. It's just made in a new way. So we're going to talk about that very bottom square with the chocolate in it today. We're going to talk about things like vanilla, chocolate, and coffee, which can be made using precision fermentation. So another show of hands, anyone here eat pickles or drink beer? Fermentation, precision fermentation, not that new. So this is just a new way of using it by applying a whole bunch of really, new approaches. So why is this an opportunity for Canada? And particularly, why is it an opportunity for companies like so many of you are from, these ingredient companies? We have been extremely successful in the plant-based alternative space, particularly with fractionating pulses like chickpeas, lentils, people were talking about fava earlier, and just dried peas. And the byproduct is much bigger than the actual product. There's a tremendous amount of starch that is produced after one does that kind of work. Now, there's a little asterisk next to the 175 metric tons there, because that's a combined number, and it's an estimated number. That's a combined number of actual like flour style starch and other more, isolated starches. But long story short, we make a ton of starch. And to put something to ferment in this precision fermentation process, starch is an amazing biomass. It's a great first ingredient. So for Canada, we can not only be first in technology, but we can actually potentially be very globally competitive on price, because no one else we grow more chickpeas than anybody else. Well, we export more chickpeas than anybody else in the world already. And we have this amazing side stream, which is just sitting there waiting for somebody to do something clever with it. This kind of speaks for itself. I think I've already basically made this point. So I'll let you just peruse that quote yourselves. And then I'll get into the real platform we're going to talk from today. If Canada were to produce, and it's a moonshot, but if we were to produce all of our own vanilla, chocolate, and coffee, right now we spend about $2.5 billion to other countries to bring those things to us. We also have an incredible impact on the planet. The distances that these products travel to get into the coffee cups that we all were carrying around earlier today is incredibly impactful. So what could we do to get things going? Why would we start with these types of products? In my opinion, I think that it's kind of scary to tell somebody, hey, I took some cells from a piglet and I grew you this pork chop. I think consumers need a little bit of a pathway to that. So it's my opinion, and I'm going to test it with my panel and test it with you. I want you to ask lots of questions. If you have more or new knowledge that we don't have, I'd like you to please not talk with your mouth full, but tell us what that information is. And we're going to have a really nice conversation and hopefully get all of you leaving here today so that you go back to your office tomorrow and you say, you know what I heard? And that's the intent of my presentation, just to get you all thinking and to see what you do with this information. So I'm going to introduce my panelists now. I have Susan Jorgenson, who is from the Global Agricultural, I've always just called them GAP, so I have to actually read it. The Global Agri-Food Advancement Partnership. Susan has a background in education. She's a food scientist. And what's really interesting about GAP, they're located in Saskatchewan. They have an accelerator where you have tangible technology. Companies can be there for an extended time, up to 3 or 4 years, and test out the kinds of things that we're talking about today. So I'd like to welcome Susan to the stage, please. Perfect. Next is Dr. Evan Fraser, who's, I'm really quite fortunate to be able to call him one of my friends. He likes my lasagna, so that was like, we were friends instantly when that happened. Beyond being a world-leading thinker on the sustainability of food. He's chair of the Arrell Food Institute. He's also an author. He has a brand new book out called Dinner on Mars. It will be featured on Ideas on CBC in the upcoming weeks, and I'm waiting for my signed copy. So would like to welcome Evan to the stage as well. Thanks, Evan. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Ryan Philippe. He is the director of a whole bunch of cool stuff at Genome Canada. His title changes pretty often because he's one of these people who just does a lot of cool stuff. But he's a biologist who has had a really interesting career in industry and has commercialized products using precision fermentation. He also came in just for this and is heading right back to Ottawa to go to another conference. So we're super, super lucky to have him here. So let's give Ryan a warm welcome.
Thank you.
All right, let's just check. Oh, look at that. Smooth transition from one microphone to another. It's all going well. So, Ryan, why don't you right next to me? So I'm going to start with you. Why should Canadians trust precision fermentation science? It sounds like, people have called it Frankenfood and all kinds of things. Why is that a misnomer?
Well, I mean, fermentation's been part of our lives for millennia, right? I mean, like you mentioned earlier, there's bread, cheese, beer, the pickles, kimchi, one of the oldest pickles there is. But it's been deployed in food production for a long time. Vegetable rennet is a fermented product produced in the same way. So it's been a staple of where we are for a long time. And fun fact, coffee, vanilla, chocolate, they're all fermented naturally as well. So it's a very well-established process, and not only that, but it promotes health and nutrition when used to produce your food. So the precision fermentation really is just an expansion of the technology that's been around with us for a very long time, and really occurs at the interface of synthetic biology, biotechnology, basically these technologies that allow us to understand organisms so that we can harness them for the production of natural ingredients.
Cool. So yeah, not that scary when you get around, some of the hype and the. I
mean, basically, you put yeast in a tank, you give it sugar, and instead of breaking sugar down into alcohol, it builds it up into stuff that you can eat and provide healthful food.
Cool. Thank you for that. And so, Susan, you working at GAP, you have a sense of the resources Canada has at hand for innovators who want to start doing this kind of thing. What do we have in place right now, and what does GAP see as areas that we could start working on tomorrow?
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me on the microphone?
We can hear you now.
Good, thanks. So because of a lot of the reasons that you talked about in your slides, Dana, like the sustainability factor and opportunities for circular economy and food security, I think there are a lot of opportunities. There's public R&D happening with the NRC. The Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has their development center. GAP in Saskatchewan offers long-term incubation, patient capital, all kinds of supports for companies that are looking to get into this space, and then partnering with the Food Development Center, with Global Institute for Food Security, with their Omics platform there, to really help innovators get in touch with the expertise that they need, maybe in genomics or in terms of managing from their discovery phase through to commercialization with what their product is going to be. There was a report that was developed by Garvin and Associates. That's the report on the Canadian ecosystem, or fermentation ecosystem. And so that report just kind of identified who are the players in the space. They looked at the education institutes that are developing the talent that is going to be needed. It's looking at different funding opportunities, even private sector companies that are providing services to companies that are looking to develop, so that that R&D, but then the whole process can happen here in Canada rather than having to head to Europe or head to the US to access it.
Okay. Thank you. That's really interesting. It strikes me, this wasn't a planned question, but Evan, besides writing Dinner on Mars, has also been editing a book about, I guess it's a scholarly book about this whole topic. So when you hear what Susan has to say, do you see us being, more developed, similarly developed, underdeveloped than some of the things you've been exposed to while creating this book?
Yeah, so the book will be an academic book. Ricky, who's somewhere here, I think, is one of the co-editors. David Kaplan from Tufts University, Lenore Newman from the Fraser Valley. It was a year ago when I went to get a book on cellular agriculture off the shelf and discovered that was a gap. There was no such book. One thing leads to another, and the four of us called up labs all over the world to say, would you contribute chapters? Would you write a chapter on precision fermentation? And cell culture and scaffolding and bioreactor design and the ethics and the sustainability elements and whatnot. And I'd say Canada's behind. I mean, I really do. When I look at the stuff that is being contributed by colleagues, specifically in the Netherlands or Singapore or Israel, the Bay Area of San Francisco, it is far in excess of what most Canadian universities and research institutes are doing. There are exceptions, of course. Colleagues of mine at the University of Guelph, Alejandro Maragoni, is doing great stuff. So I'm not saying it's all behind, but we don't have a lot of research capacity in this space. At the University of Guelph, we've got phenomenal dairy and beef research stations. We don't have anything on cellular agriculture, really, except Alex's lab. So yeah, it's an area where we should be, I think, aspiring to be a global leader, but have a fair bit of catch up.
Cool. Great segue into the question I want to ask next of all of you, and it doesn't matter to me who'd like to go first, so you can, you could arm wrestle over it if you wanted. But what does Canada need to do today to be able to sell import replacements of ingredients like the ones I introduced in my presentation? Like how could we get started? Ryan, maybe I'll start with you since we're, it's a natural pathway.
Oh, come on. Get my arm ready here.
I realized it would change the whole tempo of our talk if we had the arm wrestling interlude. So,
Well, from the Genome Canada perspective, I mean, we invest in research and innovation in Canada. So there's a clear research gap, as was just alluded to. Along with that, the talent pool that comes with it. So we are increasing our ability to generate skilled knowledge workers in this space. But retaining them is a big challenge given how the growth rate of this industry and how competitive it is to be able to retain these people. Like when I was at Manus, we actually fired people, sent them to Europe to get trained, and then rehired them because we just couldn't find the talent. So developing the research, developing the talent, but the talent is more than just highly skilled workers. There's the people you need to actually operate these facilities, these production facilities. And so that production side, the chemical engineering side, is also lacking. And I mean, there's a whole lot in terms of infrastructure, market access, but I'll focus on that part.
Yeah, that's a great start. Evan, do you have anything to add there?
Well, yeah, I mean, getting back to the Foundations of Cellular Agriculture book that a couple of us are working on, one of the chapters is with Yadiras, who's sitting there from New Harvest, and it's on the challenge of training the next generation. And this means a couple of things. Not only do we need to recognize that young people coming into our ag and vet schools and our colleges and universities need to be trained with a very, very different skill set. We also have to be aware that we have this vast infrastructure, families dependent on traditional livestock. And if there's a tension between these new entrances into the market and the older established livestock-based proteins, then maybe there's a retraining component that needs to go on as well. So it's a this and that, not a this or that. So it's a very complicated training landscape. And then the final thing I'd say is, agriculture as a whole suffers under this perception that farming involves a red barn and a straw hat and a pitchfork. And so a lot of work I do is talking to young people that the farmer of the future probably is going to wear a lab coat, not drive a tractor. And actually, by participating in ag tech and precision ag fermentation for this exact panel, you're part of one of the most exciting sectors of science and innovation. And you're helping feed the world, and you're helping drive sustainability, and you're going to get a good job. I was talking to the chief financial officer for Shiok Meats, which is a Singapore-based startup. They've got about 50 employees, so it's a pretty big startup. The person basically said, "We will hire everybody in your labs tomorrow." I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
so I sent some emails out.
They called CFIN too. They're like, do you have people in Canada who want to come to Singapore? And I'm like,
well, you
yes, but I want them first.
Yeah, you connected us to them, and they she was like, we're hiring. We'll hire everybody. Crazy.
Yeah. Susan, a lot's been said. Anything to contribute to?
Yeah, Dana, I think I would just add that if you're going to sell products in Canada, you need a market to buy them. And I think informing consumers that it's not scary science, that it's great opportunities to reduce the ecological input of their food with a replacement opportunity that we're growing the economy here in Canada, but then just have a general understanding of the science so that it's not terrifying. And I think it needs a better name too, something that's a little bit more palatable. So
I'm so with you. I mean, I named Yodel, so naming's my thing, and I'm stuck. So if anybody has any ideas for a name, I think, that we need a national competition. I was of an age when Sky Dome was built, and there was a competition in Toronto to name it Sky Dome. Now it's got some company name on it, but I know when The Weeknd played at Sky Dome a couple of weeks ago, I heard on the radio that he continued to call it Sky Dome. So I want to Sky Domeize this topic. So put your heads together, folks. Totally with you. So Evan, this $12.5 billion opportunity is pretty sexy and exciting for people in business, but we hear so much from the Canadian government, and I think rightly so, about decarbonization and sustainability. There's a national sustainability index being created. Just this last weekend, we saw climate change effects in action on our east coast of Canada. What is the sustainability opportunity here? Your Twitter handle is feeding 9 billion. I've always loved how you branded your Twitter handle with exactly what you care about. So tell us what's at stake, or what can we gain back, or what can we prevent from happening?
So the sustainability claims is such an interesting topic of conversation, and one that we can be really excited about, but also not naive about. And so that's probably my fundamental message. I mean, if we transition from a livestock-based protein portfolio to one that's heavily weighted towards plants or fermentation or cellular tissue culture, then there are some real sustainability gains to be had. The energy and the water footprint and the land base drops significantly. But let's just pause there and unpack that. If we produce a bunch of protein in a bioreactor outside of Toronto, and therefore we don't buy beef from Alberta, does the land that's then not used for beef, does it get turned back to nature for a sustainability benefit, or does it get turned into an Amazon fulfillment center? So there's a real question there as to whether or not, quote, sparing land for agriculture using technology actually results in nature winning. And then there's the obvious question of what's the Albertan rancher going to do when they lose their market share? And there is a fraught challenge there, because some of the technologies, many of the technologies that we're talking about, are actually urban-based knowledge economy technologies, which will advantage Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and disadvantage Saskatchewan and Regina. So is there a contributor to Western alienation and the rural-urban divide playing out here? And I'm not suggesting that these are reasons not to embrace technology or move forward with technology. I'm not suggesting there isn't a sustainability gain. I think there is, 100%. But we can't be naive about that sustainability gain. We need in regulatory environments that protect nature, that pay farmers for ecosystem services, that buy back land from the ranchers and turn it over to nature. There's all sorts of mechanisms that have to be put in place in order to drive the sustainability agenda, because the technology, as powerful it is, as disruptive as it is not a panacea on its own. And so let's just be clear-headed about this one.
Yeah, good thoughts, and all things that, us as citizens have to think about. There's, we have these different hats on, our industry hats and our academic hats, but then, our Canadian citizen hats, very important. So Ryan, why are so many companies around the world and in Canada focusing on the animal protein value proposition around this type of science? Why is, making everyday things that are in our cupboards that are shelf stable like vanilla not as interesting to investors and entrepreneurs, in your opinion?
Well, that's interesting. The investor perspective. I think it has a lot to do with the market messaging, market demand, and the way that precision fermented ingredients have been deployed so far. There's a variety of values that are being tapped into through cellular agriculture, right? There's sustainability, emissions reduction, animal health and welfare, health claims and health improvement potentially. So there's a variety of perspectives that are really sort of driving that. And everybody, cares about, the cute little pig or that cow kind of thing. There's a visceral human response to it, as opposed to a lot of precision fermented products, which are here. I mean, we're consuming them, right? Like if you've ever had a Fresca, you're consuming some of the ingredients that I made. They're hidden in the labels, right? A big part of it is that their attractiveness to a lot of food producers is that they could be labeled as natural products, and so they slip in under there. So they're not able to generate the awareness of all of these sustainability benefits and the circularity and all these things that come into play. So it's really an exposure, a public messaging issue.
So back to Susan's point about, that education piece, et cetera. So Susan, I'm going to skip ahead. I'm looking at the time, and I really do want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to pause just after I ask you one more question. And if the audience is still too engaged in their lunch, I'll keep going with our planned questions. But you're working very closely with investors, and what do they need to know? So many people in venture capital and even the angel space have come to it from ICT, Silicon Valley, investing in apps and, the Ubers of the world, et cetera. What do those kinds of people need to know about this space for them to, make good decisions and for the companies that they invest in to get off on the right foot?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dana. So I think two things. One is that there's potentially tremendous opportunity here, so it's worth investing in. And I think the other thing is that it's a really different industry than software that you're describing with Uber and whatever. And so I think there is a very long road to commercial products in this space. And there's a big cash investment time in R&D. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time to kind of get that product right and ready. But then again, towards the scale and commercialization phase of the product. And so it doesn't necessarily fit the same model as some other kinds of, I guess more like hardware or like the software, like I was just saying. But then also I think that there's this regulatory kind of obstacle that companies need a bit more support to work through too, especially kind of as this is advancing and evolving. And so I think investors just need to be aware that it's worth doing, but it is going to take a little bit more time and that the money might need to be phased a little bit differently.
Yeah, that's interesting. You used a phrase a little earlier when you were talking about GAP, and you said patient capital. And then a moment ago, you talked about a little more time. How would you, contextualize? Like, could you put a number or a range of, like, are we talking, with ICT, it's sometimes months, with other products. Ryan's product took 10 years to come to market. The product that he mentioned is used in products like Fresca. So are we somewhere in between that, or are we on that sort of 10-year side? Just curious.
I would say that we're closer in the 10-year side. I think the number is 6 to 7 years on average. And so, yeah, it's a long road. It's not a month's kind of game. I think the idea with GAP in the long-term incubation is that, there's lots of accelerators that'll do like a 3-month program or whatever. And in there, you're developing the leader and you're maybe developing some business acumen. But in 3 or 4 years of incubation, you're developing that technology or that innovative product. And so there is understanding that it does take a really long time, and there's going to be all kinds of different pivots that need to happen or different modifications within scale up that will just take time.
Yeah, I always like to talk about my own experience in innovation and my success is the fact that I'm a donkey. Like, I always know where the carrot is, but I never really know how I'm going to get to it. And that journey is the excitement. And certainly, I think most people who have their eye on whatever the product is made with, cellular techniques probably will have a complicated path. So just turning to you, the audience, we can pause here and take a few questions. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add or ask? How would the chocolate taste? Well, it should taste exactly like chocolate, right? I mean, if it's bioidentical. So, Ryan?
Oh, that's a very good question, right? I think that's the work that I used to do with the flavor houses. You like the vanilla product, for instance. There's vanillin has been on market for a very long time, right? There's the petroleum-derived stuff. There's actually natural vanillin, which is produced via fermentation. That's been on the market for a very long time. But vanillin is one compound, right? It's one note of the richness that is vanilla. And so there's a lot of work, flavor systems. I heard a presentation earlier where you're trying to identify, the minimum viable product that you can then act as a replacement to some of these solutions, right? And so coffee, there's a Tomo coffee. There's a replacement that's being developed, but they're always sort of a pale comparison of it. But that's where precision fermentation comes in. Like the ingredient in Fresca, it's an ingredient in nature that's in the tens of thousands of dollars. And so it's limited, and climate change and pest issues are causing it to decrease. With fermentation, you can achieve like a two orders of magnitude reduction in price. And so with that, you're incentivized to develop the flavor systems that allow you to come in. So it's never going to be molecularly identical because these things are complex, thousands of molecules that come into it. But the science has advanced to the point where you can get, close enough that your brain accepts it as a substitute.
So could it pass a triangle test with a piece of chocolate, a piece of Lindt chocolate? Could you get close enough?
Yeah.
You could?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So we all speak triangle test in this room, I think, so I don't have to explain that. Great question, Louis. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, great. Well, I'm going to kind of continue. Oh, yeah, Philip.
One question. This is a very broad question. How do you address the IP with respect to getting into this type of cellular fermentation? Who owns it? When you discover something, therefore, how do you share the wealth?
Yeah, I can imagine that in Susan's world, that's all negotiated and figured out before people come into the GAP facility. But for Genome Canada and scientists working in academic institutions like U of G, how would you approach it? Evan, do you want to take a step?
Well, at a high level, I think this is hard IP to protect, to be honest. I mean, I think, if there's the two sort of paradigms, the Coca-Cola, where you have a formulation that basically anybody can create, but you market it and you do it by you capture the market by distribution and volume and efficiency, versus the Google, where you've got some really valuable, protectable IP. I think cellular agriculture is more of a Coca-Cola kind of company, where companies will have to market their products, appeal to consumers, and they will become branded entities. I'm guessing this is more of a Coca-Cola kind of part of the economy than a Google part of the economy. Happy to debate that. So then what do you do as an academic? Well, you try to work with some fabulous startup that's got a great marketing department and hope for a big IPO.
Gotcha. Focus group of one, Evan Fraser. Ryan, anything to comment on there?
Well, at Genome Canada, we're at the mercy of university tech transfer offices, right? And so from our perspective...
Hey, I used to work for one of those. We're nice people.
I say that coming from a startup perspective. Making sure that they are equipped to generate IP that is valuable, worthwhile, worth protecting, doesn't create barriers to others coming into the space is an important first step. But I have to agree with Evan. When it comes to precision fermentation, you're not getting composition of matter IP, which is sort of gold standard.
It's more about the equipment, I would think, like the bioreactors, the scaffolding technology, the AI, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot more sort of process IP, which is you can work around it from a competitive perspective. So developing the technologies that are sort of the enabling technologies, the platforms, are very, very important because they unlock more things, right? Yeah, it took us 10 years to get to our first product in Manus, but now we're averaging about 2 years cycle to a new product because you built out this platform. there's a bunch of trade secrets, but there's a bunch of core technology that can be locked up in there. And you leverage that to then approach partnerships with other organizations, right? You can enable the solutions that they're looking at in terms of replacements to their supply chains that are being stressed by climate change or consumer demand. So really that core IP in terms of platform development can then be leveraged with those partners. And as long as you're both bringing something of value, right, to Joe's points earlier to this morning, you could have the upstream tech with the production, these kinds of things start to work together and create not necessarily strong blocking positions, but you then exploit them to create a commercial position that you can then be advantaged in.
That's great. That was a very full answer. It's like Phil, you planted Phil right there in the audience. Nicely done. Susan, I made some assumptions about your answer. Would you care to jump in and add anything else?
Yeah, sure. I mean, from GAP's standpoint, we would work with companies that already have IP that's patented or submitted or whatever. We wouldn't take a piece of the IP because it's, from investor point of view, more productive for the company to hold all of it. But then I do think you're right that there is that sort of leveraging of partnerships to figure out maybe whose target species or genomic info is going to be the most valuable, and I think working together that way.
Thank you so much. So I see from our little clock, we've got 2 minutes left. I'd love to just give each panelist an opportunity to, maybe just share a takeaway that they'd like the audience to focus on. And it could be based on one of the questions we didn't get to, or just something that came to you during the chat. So I'll start with you, Susan, since your vocal cords are primed.
Ooh, that's a hard one. I would say, I guess for people that are kind of in the world a little bit and are informed, maybe there's a bit of a responsibility that there is some knowledge sharing that happens that we can maybe help develop the consumer base for it. Mm-hmm. Talking about the import replacements, I'm wondering about coffee. Like chocolate, sure, I'm good. I'm ready to try it. Even the replacement meats. I'm from the prairies, but I'm very happy to give it a go. But I feel like that's like my emotional core.
Well, there's a huge ritual. Starbucks used to be a client of mine way back, and coffee is about ritual. Maybe it's too steep a mountain to climb. I don't disagree. Yeah. Evan, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm going to plug my book.
Dinner on Mars by Dr. Evan Fraser and Dr. Lenore Newman.
So it was a thought experiment about what it would take to feed a Martian colony and how those technologies will change Earth. And one of the bits of research which I found so interesting as part of this was apparently in the 1890s, the first urban planning conference in the world happened in Chicago, and delegates were there to debate a solution to the biggest problem of the time, which was huge piles of horse shit. Massive piles of horse shit. And they had these graphs that apparently projected that by 2030, by 1930, there would be 3-story piles of horse manure on the streets of New York and Chicago. And then that didn't happen. And that didn't happen because of technology, of course.
Henry Ford.
And I actually looked up, I went down a deep rabbit hole, and I looked up this 1921 US Ag Census, and there were 15 million horses and 45 million acres of land devoted to oats in 1921 in the US. And by 1961 census, both of those numbers were about 10% of their historic highs. A couple of million horses and a couple million acres of land. And that was a massive transition. And in that transition, untold blacksmiths and farriers and veterinarians and horse breeders must have lost their livelihoods. And some of them would have retrained, and some of them would have gotten depressed, and some of them would have moved or whatever. And I have a feeling that we're at the beginning of a similar scale of disruption. And I think that it's going to bring a lot of cool things. It's going to bring a lot of economic opportunities, and it's going to bring a lot of the negative sides of disruption. And I'm really glad, 2 things. One, that I said no to the family farm in Niagara 20 years ago, because, wow, that wasn't a sector to bet on. And 2, that I get to sit at the front row of one of the greatest transitions. And it's going to be fascinating, and it's going to be good, and it's going to be bad.
Yeah, you're right. And yeah, sort of one of my regrets is that I probably won't live to see the full adoption of some of what I personally feel like we're in, like the golden age of food science. There's just so much happening. This being just one really amazing and cool line of inquiry. Ryan.
What Evan said. I think, here. I'm a true believer in the technology.
By the book.
So if I take a different tack, I'll just point out the importance of systems level thinking and coalitions in rolling these technologies, implementing them in. The technology has been enabled really at the interface, the convergence of genomics, biotechnology, AI, robotics, and it's continuing to accelerate because of that. There's a lot of talk about how human genomes are so cheap to sequence. What's really enabling this is the ability to synthesize DNA at a really cheap cost, right? So all of these pieces are coming together and converging to this moment in time, but there's still a lot that has to come together to make that technology possible, right? There's the regulatory, there's the social engagement, there's the market development, the market access. But when you take that systems level thinking and connect the pieces properly, you can also start to appreciate some of the bigger perspectives. It's not easy, it's really hard. That's where organizations like Genome Canada can play a role in terms of convening these groups. But at the end of the day, it's the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the businesses that are going to take it forward. But there's benefits that are going to be realized. Like one of the things that we don't ever talk about really is if we can develop cellular agriculture, one of the big costs of meat production, along with the methanes and all these other things, is antimicrobial resistance, right? Meat production requires massive amounts of modern meat production, massive amounts of antimicrobials. They leak into the environment. And we're talking about an existential challenge for humanity, right? If our antibiotics don't work, we're talking about lots and lots of people dying. I mean, there's some estimates of like 4 billion by 2075 if we don't start to address these things. Wow. And so, there's these system level interactions that are going to generate more impact beyond what we can currently appreciate, both positive and negative. So there's going to be unintended consequences, but we have to embrace the technology and deploy it.
Get over our squeamishness, bottom line, right?
Yeah, there's a saying that we used to have where everybody's against biotechnology until they need biologics, and then all of a sudden they're a believer. It's going to be the same thing with food.
Very interesting. Well, thank you. You've been an awesome audience. I'm going to ask you to show hands again because it's just, I don't know, it's what I'm doing today. Who here learned something from my panel? Right? So thank you. Let's give them a big hand. And thanks so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Louis, who I think is going to give out some prizes.